Good afternoon. My name is Dagna Simmons, and I'm the president of the League of Women Voters. We are very happy to, in cooperation with the Northwest Iowa Group of Sierra Club, to present this event this afternoon about artificial light, and don't be afraid of the dark. Our presenter today is David Hoferer, who is a professor of biology and environmental science at Briar Cliff University. He has taught at the university level for 17 years. Recently, he has set up the Cliff Conservation Project to study the history of the conversion of the Lusk Hills from prairie and forest to human uses. The goal will be to restore a prairie on Briar Cliff's campus. He volunteers his time serving on the executive committee of the Northwest Iowa Group of the Sierra Club. And welcome to David, and we'll let him take it from here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. 1 second here while I readjust this so that hopefully this will display for you guys. All right. Yeah, maybe turning the lights out in front would be a good idea.
I don't know how to do that.
It's on. It's on.
Got a light switch over there? You're trying, okay. Wrong one, so.
Okay. Turn off the lights in the back.
There we go.
There you
All right. So, yeah, now we're in the dark. But of course, we're not supposed to be afraid of the dark today. So, thank you, everyone. I thank the Northwest Iowa Sierra Group and the League of Women Voters here at SIoux City for inviting me to speak with you today. And I'd like to just talk to you a little bit about artificial light at night and how that affects wildlife, and then toward the end, just a little bit about how it affects us as well. So what I want to do is I want to begin with a story. So when I was growing up, my church had a co-pastor who used to be a missionary over in Africa. And I don't know if any of you have ever been in places where there really is no electricity. But he said once, just imagine that it's nighttime. Like you got out of bed, maybe have to go use the outhouse, and realize you have no idea where that is because you can't see anything. You can put your hand in front of your face, just inches away, and there's nothing there. You just can't see anything. As you try to look around, you can hear wildlife. You can hear the insects. You can hear some birds, that sort of thing. But then as you look up, what begins to appear to you is a beautiful scene, possibly like this one. This, of course, is of the Milky Way itself in the night sky. But the way he described it was, it's more stars than you can even imagine. And of course, what a beautiful, beautiful scene that is. And now imagine that up until about 100 years ago, that was normal, not only for wildlife, but for us too. Today, however, things look a little different. Today, we are really lit up, and you can really see, especially the eastern half here of the United States, how lit up the eastern half really is. And of course, what kind of preserves a lot of the dark areas out west is the fact that we have, the great national parks and wilderness areas and national forests and those types of things out west. But since the eastern half of our continent was settled first, that's where we have created the big light shows. So what does artificial light at night, which actually is called ALAN, So my apologies to anyone who has the name Alan, but A-L-A-N, artificial light at night. That's how I will be referring to it. What does artificial light at night actually do to vertebrates? Right? And we are vertebrates. Anything that has a backbone is a vertebrate. Well, as you can see here, one of the main things that it affects is the circadian rhythm. In the circadian rhythm, in humans, we primarily talk about our 24-hour sleep-wake cycles. That also is true for our other vertebrate friends. But we can talk about other yearly trends as well. In ecology, we call that phenology, which is just the study of repeated patterns, such as when the birds actually migrate back in spring, when they migrate in fall, the breeding seasons of our salamanders, that sort of thing. These are repeated patterns every year. They can also be disrupted by artificial light at night. So by disrupting the circadian rhythms or the yearly rhythms, then what else is disrupted? The mating patterns and the mating behaviors of vertebrates, from fishes all the way up to primates. Also, their feeding of their young. And there might be some positives there for feeding of young, at least for birds. Their foraging behavior is also disrupted. And then I would like to get into a little bit about the navigation of birds, because we are in spring migration season right now. So when I talk about the disruption of the circadian rhythms, there are two main types of hormones that I want to talk about. The first is melatonin, and I don't know, maybe all of us might have taken like melatonin gummies or something like that. You can't get to sleep at night. Melatonin is the hormone that's normally secreted by our brains when it gets dark. It makes us tired and it tells us it's time to go to sleep. So it really helps to regulate our sleep-wake cycles. Other vertebrates also have melatonin released from their brains to regulate their periods of activity and inactivity as well. The other set of hormones are the reproductive hormones. And in the reproductive hormones, this is going to affect mating behaviors, the timing of the breeding season, and how individuals of wildlife species will actually interact with each other and either mate or not mate, which obviously then affects the fertility and the continuance of those species in the wild. So again, like I said, the circadian rhythms are basically our 24-hour sleep-wake cycles. There are studies that have been done with people who are volunteered. Scientists will keep them in rooms where they only have artificial lights. And then they will just observe their behavior. And it turns out that if we don't see the sun, our sleep-wake cycles go to about a 26-hour period, not 24 hours. So what that means is we need the sun to kind of reset our sleep-wake cycles. And this seems to be true for other vertebrates as well. So throughout history, you think about evolutionary history for all of these wildlife species, what has happened is that the sun and the night, so the moon and the stars at night, the sun during the day, have been reliable predictors of the changing of seasons, when it's time to breed, when it's time to migrate, when it's time to have a period of inactivity, etc. And so they have evolved to sync their 24-hour rhythms as well as their yearly patterns of life histories with the changes in the sun cycle and the moon and the stars. Now, the problem is an increasing amount of scientific evidence shows that our artificial lights at night will disrupt these processes. So here's a little overview of this, and then I'll summarize it a little bit more myself.
Hi, I'm Jack, and I'm a firefighter. Think there's nothing you can do to help protect wildlife in 1 minute? Watch this. Wildlife can be harmed by too much artificial light at night. Many essential behaviors, such as mating, migrating, navigating, and finding food, depend on the ability to experience natural darkness. You can help restore this delicate balance to ecosystems. Make sure that any exterior lights you use are shielded and facing down. And consider using lights with a red or yellow tint. as long wavelengths are less visible to most species and can minimize impact. Have more time? See if you can start a local initiative to insist that lights on billboards face down rather than upwards, where they contribute to sky glow, glare, and clutter, all of which disrupt wildlife behavior. See, if you have even 1 minute, there's something that you can do to help. Be the change you want to see in the world. Come on, let's show them what you can do.
So that's just a little bit of an overview. And he said that, of course, these artificial lights at night can disrupt all kinds of behaviors. So let's look at some of the behaviors that are disrupted by artificial lights at night. Here, we're looking at 2 species of freshwater fishes that actually occur in European rivers. And what you can see here is that they were only subjected to the amount of artificial light at night that possibly would be equal to about half of the normal light of a full moon. Some of our cities, however, can actually have artificial light at night that it has greater intensity than a full moon night. And so that's one of the reasons that wildlife can be disrupted, because then basically they have greater than a full moon, 30 days out of the month, but the full moon's only supposed to happen once in that time, So what the researchers thought, because it was found that artificial light at night might affect melatonin and therefore the daily patterns of inactivity and activity, that it might affect the melatonin levels in the fishes as well. It turned out it didn't. Instead, it affected the reproductive hormones. And it altered their breeding behavior and their timing of their breeding. And the problem, of course, with altering the timing of the breeding is that in the wild, most wild species will time their breeding to when the food is most plentiful for the young or for the adults to feed the young if you have like birds or something like that. Here's actually a positive of artificial lights at night. When mockingbirds were studied, they were actually studied when they nested next to some parking lots that were completely lit up at night. They were also studied when they nested in the forest, far away from the artificial lights. And in comparing the ones that nested under dark conditions versus the ones that nested then under the artificial lights or lighting up the entire night for them, what happened is the parents with the artificial light at night would feed the offspring for about 15 minutes longer into the evening. Now, that indicates that the parents did not understand when it was night and when it was time to go into a period of inactivity. It could benefit the young because they're actually being better fed. But it could also negatively affect the health of the parents because now without that period of inactivity, they're expending more energy. And that means that it might be less likely that they are around to breed next year. So possible pluses and minuses there. We need more research to determine these, whether the pluses outweigh the minuses or the other way around. Mammals. How about mammals? Well, mammals have been studied, and the study that I'm referring to here looks at 2 rodent species. And so what they do is they roam around an area. Of course, they have their home nest where they can escape to from predators, that sort of thing, to be safe. But then the males and females will have to roam around their territories. The males generally have slightly larger territories, but the idea is when they're roaming around, they will actually meet each other, and then if it's mating season, they can initiate mating behavior so that offspring will be produced. So what you can see here is that under the artificial light at night, the 2 species that were studied actually reduced their activities during the day. Again, indicating that they did not really seem to understand the difference between night and day. And normally, what they would do is they wouldn't roam around as much at night. Now, it depends on the species and their adaptations, but if I'm a little rodent, I can think why. Those owls are out there at night, right? So you don't want to roam as far from your home nest at night. But under artificial lights at night, they basically behaved as if it was daytime. And they roamed almost the same home range as they did during the day. The other thing is that, again, they need their home ranges to overlap. They need to actually move around and actually meet each other so that males and females can potentially initiate mating. They were out of sync with their activities because different individuals would then kind of set different sleep-wake cycles. And so now when they're roaming, they didn't necessarily meet each other as often, which again can potentially disrupt the mating processes. What if we bring bats into it? There are some studies that show that bats sometimes around our lights in our cities just feast and they have a smorgasbord. Because as you know, the insects are attracted to the lights. And so the bats alter their behaviors because, you know, it's sort of like someone who loves hamburgers. You put a plate of 30 hamburgers on and they're like, I'm good for a week. Just let me be, you know, I'll eat these. That's what they're doing. But oddly enough, the overall effects on bats seem to be slightly negative because the juveniles are not doing as well. It actually slowed the development of the juveniles and reduced their body masses. The reduction of body mass is associated with increased levels of activity for longer during a 24-hour period than is normal for them. So that seems to be what was happening. So even though it looks like the bats were feasting, it's possible that they were too active for too long as well. The other thing is you might be familiar with white nose syndrome in bats. That is a fungus that is actually severely impacting many bat populations, including some endangered bats here in North America. Since the artificial lights at night actually negatively impacted the immune systems of the bats, now they're more susceptible to not only that disease, but other diseases that can now easily be transmitted through the rookery where they roost at night. What I point out here, the mate search behaviors, those were primarily for the other rodents that were studied. If you're familiar with sea turtles, we have 7 species of sea turtles that are still alive in the world today. 6 of them are endangered. And sea turtles are just that. They are reptiles that have secondarily adapted to life in the ocean. But the problem that the females have is they have to come back on shore in order to lay their eggs. Like most reptiles, they have a very leathery egg. If they tried to lay it in the water, water would just seep in and drown the embryos. And if they lay them on top of the beach or other vegetation, where they crawl up onto, because some of them will nest on islands that may not have much of a beach, they can't really do that either because the leathery shell means it will actually lose water. And now their young will desiccate inside the egg. So they have to crawl up onto the beaches or into soils. They have to dig down in, they deposit their eggs, and then they have to cover that back up. For some females, this can be a 2 to 3 day journey, just crawling up that beach, digging the hole, laying their eggs, covering the hole, and then getting back to the ocean where the food is. So it's a very arduous journey for the females. It's also an arduous journey for the young, because when they begin to hatch, mom is not there to protect them. So the timing of hatching of many of these sea turtle species, wherever they are, is timed to the full moon cycle. When they hatch, they orient toward the light. Now normally what the light is the moon shining over the ocean. And so they go toward the light and therefore the safety of the ocean. Because the other reptiles, the mammals, the birds, they know the young turtles are about to hatch and the smorgasbord is about to happen. So as soon as they get out of that nest, they have to crawl as fast as they can to the ocean to get away from all the predators trying to eat them. Well, the problem is artificial lights at night disorient the young turtles. And so if we put our houses right on the beach, if we put a marina there, if we put other businesses there, those lights at night, sea turtle doesn't know the difference between those lights and the moon. And suddenly they're turned around and they crawl up the shore rather than down the shore toward the ocean, and they're eaten by predators, and obviously that's not good for them and that's not good for the species. Primates have been shown to have their behavior altered as well. So in primates, what researchers have found is, again, those reproductive hormones are disrupted. They're out of sync with the season. And therefore, their mating systems, if they're a primate that has a normal breeding season, some don't, but if they have a normal breeding season, now they can be breeding at a time when food is not optimal for the mothers, so they get proper nutrition, so they can produce the milk that the offspring are going to need. Another thing is this, and I'll show this, perceived risk of predation. What does that mean? Well, there was a study that was done where artificial nest boxes were provided for little primates. And what happened is when they were in the presence of artificial light at night, they didn't seem to understand the difference between day and night. During the day, that's when all the predators could potentially see them. So what did they do at night? They reduced their feeding time because the lights were lighting up everything, so they didn't get as much food. They also didn't spend time when they found the food actually eating it where they found it. Instead, they took it back to their nests in order to eat it. They're not getting as much food, they're not engaging in their normal behavior, and they had reduced body mass. So why are they bringing it back to the nest boxes? I'll go back to this one. Because apparently they perceived that there were predators there that could potentially get them at night because the artificial lights made them visible to the predators. But now I'd like to talk a little bit more about birds. Right? Birds are also our vertebrate friends. I don't know about you, I have a birdhouse in my backyard, and I have several bird feeders. And my wife and I really enjoy seeing the squirrels eat all the bird food that we put out every time. Worldwide, about 19% of birds will migrate because so many, of course, live in the tropics where they don't need to. But here in North America, about 70% of our bird species will migrate. And of those that migrate, 80% will migrate at night. One of the reasons for this seems to be that hawks and eagles, as you know, they tend to soar. Well, they need the thermals of the daylight in order to kind of spiral up and then soar to get where they're going. So if you're a little bird, why not fly at night when you're under cover of darkness and the predators can't see you as much? And if many of them are migrating during the day, you avoid them anyway. So they're migrating at night. And again, what were they using for navigation? Well, the navigational abilities of birds turns out to be quite extraordinary. They can use the Earth's magnetic compass. They can use landmarks, like where the forest is, where that river bends, mountains if they're migrating in mountainous areas, that sort of thing. But it turns out that artificial light at night can disrupt their navigation because so many of them seem to use the star fields. They can actually orient to the North Star. They can adjust to how the stars appear to be moving across the nighttime. In fact, I just came across a paper where they found out that that was timed to 15 degrees per hour, which is kind of amazing. Because if you think about it, there are 24 hours in a day, and if the Earth rotates, it rotates 360 degrees in one day. 360 degrees divided by 24 is the Earth rotates 15 degrees per hour. So there's experimental evidence that some birds can actually adjust exactly 15 degrees per hour with how the star field is changing, how the moonlight is changing, or if they migrate during the day, how the sun is tracking across the sky. So what does this mean for us? Well, birds are also attracted to the lights, right? Because they're attracted to the stars. They're attracted to the moon. That's what they're orienting to. So when they come up on a city and they find all these artificial lights at night, their navigation for that night is often disrupted. And sometimes they've been observed just kind of swirling around the city until they just kind of come down to roost because they're so exhausted. In cities, there might be less food there as well. But as you can see here, it's estimated that in the United States alone, this doesn't include all of North America, up to 100 million birds die by crashing into our windows. And, that's a lot of birds.
Yes.
And it's a little bit more in terms of skyscrapers indeed are worse for birds. But overall, throughout all of North America, now we're going to include Mexico, we're going to include Canada, that sort of thing, It's about 320 million that might die by hitting our business buildings, including the skyscrapers, but about 250 million by hitting our residences. So whether we are shining light out of our own windows from our homes and our apartments at night actually affects the birds as well. Because the birds don't recognize a window as a window. They either see it as something that is see-through and therefore is not there and crash into it, or if it's slightly reflective, they might see, oh, wait a minute, there's a little dark patch there, or I can hide in there from a predator, and they try to land in there and hit the window. Or if a tree is reflecting off of it, they're like, hey, that's a perch for me, and they hit the window because they expect to find a tree and a branch. Here is an overview of this. Hopefully you can hear this.
Hi, I'm Alicia and I'm a producer. Think there's something you can do to help protect birds in 1 minute? Watch this. Many species of birds hunt or migrate during the nighttime hours. However, due to the brightening of the night sky from artificial light, birds' hunting patterns and migratory abilities can be disrupted. One source of artificial light affecting birds is from tall buildings and towers. On foggy nights, migrating birds are drawn towards lights in cities and may collide with lit buildings or circle them until exhausted. If you work in a high-rise building, it only takes a minute to talk to your boss or the building's landlord about the possibility of dimming or turning the lights off when the building is unoccupied. This will not only help the birds, it will also consume less energy and save the building's owner money. It's been estimated that 100 million birds in North America die each year due to a collision with lighted buildings and towers. But if you have even 1 minute, there's something you can do about it. Be the change you want to see in the world. Come on, let's show them what you can do.
And so what can we do? Well, researchers at the University of Delaware will show us what we can do. And for those of you who are in the know, I'll just let you know that the bird photos here were taken by Doug Tallamy at the University of Delaware.
When birds migrate, particularly small land birds, like robins that you have in your backyard, they don't just fly in one large flight from their breeding ground to the winter ground. They fly in sort of hops or steps along the way, and they'll fly at night for many hours, and then they'll land during the day to rest and refuel, and that's what we call stopovers. So there's places that they stop along their migration journey. They play an important role for these birds because the birds also can't fuel their whole migratory journey from one place. So they have to stop periodically to build up these fat reserves that serve as the fuel for flight to make these long migrations. Ever since the advent of radar in the early 1940s, we've known that birds appear on radar and can be detected on radar. In recent years, NOAA has realized that there is this second user group of weather radar data, which is really biologists that are interested in extracting all the biological information that's in those data about animals in the airspace. It's really opened up the possibilities to explore all sorts of questions. Radar is one of the most important search tools that we have because it's really hard to detect animals in the air, certainly from the ground, and also because there are a lot of animals that are active at night when it's hard to see them. Many of these birds, they've been migrating for thousands of years, and within the last 100 years or so, humans have started lighting up the skies. So birds have only really been recently exposed to all of this artificial light at night from an evolutionary sense. What's nice about the broad-scale picture that the radar can provide is that we're starting to see these patterns of broad-scale attraction of birds to brightly lit urban areas. If birds are being drawn to these brightly lit areas where there isn't a whole lot of natural habitat for them, it's pulling them away from those darker landscapes where there is more habitat. And we're concerned that that might have negative consequences for migratory birds. It seems that birds are able to refuel in these urban areas, but they don't have very much food for these birds. In fact, probably the first migrants that come through will deplete those resources pretty quickly, so those later migrants may be at a real disadvantage to find food when they stop over these urban parks.
So I hope you're able to hear that. And if not, let me just summarize a little bit of what they were talking about and a little bit of what the science is telling us. Again, birds seem to be oriented toward our lights simply because they're oriented to light. They can orient themselves during the day by where the sun is, and they can orient themselves at night and navigate when they're migrating by orienting themselves either to the moon or to the stars, depending upon whether it's more of a new moon or more of a full moon night. So they go toward light or at an angle from the light, so they know that they can get to their breeding grounds in the spring or their overwintering grounds in the fall. They need, most of them at least, stop over and need to refuel during these stopovers. Well, now, if they are oriented toward the lights, they are attracted to our cities, and our cities don't have as much food for them. They really need to go to the dark areas because those are the areas where there's a lot more food for wildlife. They rest in our cities then, possibly exhausted, again, possibly from circling for a while. They might not find enough food. As that video said, the first migrants might find a lot of food, but those who come later might find the food exhausted. And again, they might mistake our windows for perching spots, and therefore they might crash into our windows, either while they're trying to alight at night or while they're trying to start up their flight the next morning and continue their migration. So we can look at some data. If you want to track this, Birdcast is a new program of the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology, as well as many other, there are universities, there are federal agencies that help this. But you can go to Birdcast online and actually see what's going on. So I just did that to include some information about what's happening in Iowa. As you can see, last night, Saturday night, April 29, how many birds crossed over Iowa? These are birds who then were in flight and completely crossed over Iowa before roosting for the day. And then how many birds were in flight and actually stayed right here in Iowa? Is there? Okay. I thought this one was first. So I was gonna give you this one first and then zero down in. Okay. So this is not for Woodbury County. This is actually for Iowa. So I apologize for putting those in backwards. Overall, last night, it was about 8:10 p.m. to, I think they stopped looking at the radar data about 6 o'clock this morning. 25,400 birds completely crossed Iowa. That's the entire state. But over 266,000 birds are estimated to have been in flight over Iowa. So as you can see, the vast majority had to come down and refuel during the day and have a rest period. But if we look at what's happening here in Woodbury County, well, last night, 2,600 birds completely crossed our county, but 4,000 birds were in flight, meaning that about 1,400 of them are right here today, eating, refueling, so they can continue their migration tomorrow. Now, I'll point out that if there are fewer birds like that, the radar data is not quite as reliable. But if you go to Birdcast, you can see some of the radar data. So let's look at what's happening over the next couple days. So again, this is the night of April 30. Oh, that's tonight. How many birds are estimated to be in flight over the continental United States? As you can see here, about 169 million birds are predicted, and where are they going to be? Texas is the huge hotspot right now. In other words, the birds are just making their way up from Central America into the United States. What about 2 nights from now? This is May 2nd, right? So that's Tuesday night. Look at the mid-continent flyway. And that's just beginning. It's going to get even more than that. Now 219 million, we were at like 169, now we're at 219 million, we've added 50 million birds, and it's going to heat up even more than that during the month of May. In general, here in Sioux City and in Iowa, our peak migratory hours are about 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. As we get a little bit further into May, basically, I mean, if we go about 10 to 5 or 11 to 5, we're doing pretty well. If we start to mute our artificial lights at night and not disrupt them as they are flying over Sioux City. And of course, the peak migratory month here in Sioux City is May. We have some here who know a lot about migratory birds. They can tell you, oh, well, the sandhill cranes were already migrating, probably back in February. They might have made it to Iowa by even late February, but probably March. A lot of our water birds, like our ducks and geese, were migrating through here in March already and are still coming. But it's our smaller birds that are really going to be migrating here in May. So what can we do about it? Well, you saw the hotspot in Texas, so let's let this Defenders of Wildlife Texas associate actually tell us.
Hello, I'm Paul Fitzgerald with the Defenders of Wildlife Texas office. What I want to talk to you tonight, though, about is the Dark Skies program and Defenders work in Texas. As part of that, through the Lights Out Texas initiative that is going on right now, beginning in April. Texas is part of the central flyway for migratory birds, and at least 1/3 of all the migratory species that fly through North America each spring and fall as they go south come through Texas. So it's really important for all of our major cities like Austin to commit to reducing the light pollution. Migratory birds, especially the small ones, navigate by unique stars. So we can imagine that nowadays as they come across large urban areas like from San Antonio to Austin or Houston or Dallas or Worth area, all the light below them disorients them and how they navigate across the state. If we can reduce the light pollution that we produce every spring and every fall, it can really help make sure the billions of birds that migrate through the foundation and through Texas make it to where they need to go and create the next generation so that the species do survive. And it's really simple. We're asking people to turn on the lights from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. to check all your outdoor lighting and make sure that you light up only what you really need for security purposes. Maybe change the light bulbs, don't use the white light, use more amber and red lights. There's a lot of little things we can do, and there's a lot of information online to find out how we can help return dark skies to the migratory birds.
So the Lights Out program is a program of the National Audubon Society. They began it in Chicago, which is, by the way, the #1 problem for migrating birds in North America. Because the Central Flyway is far more important than people have given it credit for. That's right here in the center of the United States. I'll just want to briefly end before I just sum up with a couple of things we can do by looking at, do artificial lights at night affect us? And of course, we're vertebrates too, so we should expect that artificial light at night does indeed affect us. Again, melatonin, the sleep hormone, is only secreted by our brains when it gets dark. And it regulates our sleep-wake cycles. If you have those natural spectrum lights in your house, and you have them in more white light, or it appears a little bit more bluish, that sort of thing, they can actually affect the secretion of melatonin. I'll also just mention here, melatonin has been shown to have antioxidant properties, and there's been some links in certain medical studies that if we're not secreting the normal amounts of melatonin, that we're at increased risk for a few cancers, including prostate and breast cancers. So it's kind of important that we actually get enough melatonin. So back to that blue light. There are cells in our retinas that are called ganglion cells that actually react to the blue light, and they initiate a neuronal response that tells our brains to not secrete melatonin. And it disrupts, therefore, the natural secretion of melatonin. So if you have trouble going to sleep at night, it could be because of computer screens, iPad screens, TV screens. It can also be the types of lights that you're either shining into your home from outside, if your street lamps are white light as opposed to yellow or orange light, or it could be the types of light bulbs that you have in your homes as well. So again, the cancer risk, I already summarized that. So, what also might this do? Well, there's some evidence to show that we need these normal sleep-wake cycles Evolutionarily for us, summer was a period of higher activity where we were gathering more food when it was abundant and actually putting on some fat for the winter. Maybe not as much fat as bears do, but we needed at least a little bit. Well, the problem is, it looks like if we don't get the proper amounts of melatonin, then our bodies might be in the, hey, it's always summer mode, ready to put on weight. And so there's some indication that disrupting the normal amounts of melatonin can actually promote obesity in at least certain individuals. Also, you may have heard that our children today are going through puberty about 2 to 3 years earlier than their grandparents did. And we're not entirely sure why. But one of the interesting links that has come up in some of those studies is artificial lights at night. So remember some of the wildlife studies where artificial lights at night will actually interfere with the reproductive hormones. Well, that's what causes our kids to go through puberty, so it's possible that we're also disrupting the development of our children. And of course, 2 to 3 years earlier means that we now have 9-year-old girls going through puberty. We have 10-year-old boys going through puberty. And I don't know about you, if my daughter or my son was 14 years old and going through puberty, I'd be like, no, I mean, you're not ready for what that means. But if they're only 9 or 10, that's way too early. So what can we do about this? Well, as in so many things environmentally, the solutions are there, staring us in the face. We don't have to wait for new technology, and they don't necessarily have to cost very much either. One of the things we can do, make sure that our lights at night either are yellow, orange, or red. Red is best, but of course, then it's also harder to see. So if you want to be able to see at night, yellow to orange light, like the soft white lights. That, I don't know about you guys, my parents always had soft white lights growing up, but of course that's pretty much what the hardware store sold, and that was that, It turns out, those are good. Those are the more yellowish orange lights, those are good. You can buy LED lights today that can really save on energy, but you can also switch the hue. So if it's earlier in the evening, you can have them be more natural spectrum, like 4,500, 5,000, 6,000 Kelvin. That's a more white light that has the blue light frequencies. And as it gets dark outside, you can actually turn it down to 3,000 Kelvin, 2,500 Kelvin, and get down to the yellow or orange lights. And that will also allow you to have your normal sleep-wake cycle because your brain will actually produce the melatonin. Lights outside should be directed downward. Think about your porch lights. Think about business lights. Are they just a light and the light goes everywhere 360 degrees in 3 planes? So we're trying to literally light up the night sky to the right, to the left, everywhere. Why don't we have the lights pointed down? We can put lenses in them. We can have hoods over them. And of course, if we're talking about street lights, they should definitely be pointing down toward the street. That's what they're supposed to be lighting up. And why not have them have yellow light instead of the white light? And again, here's where I can say it doesn't necessarily have to cost that much because every city has a system of checking the street lights, replacing them on a regular schedule. So why not replace the bulbs instead of with the white lights, more yellow lights that are more nighttime friendly for us and for wildlife. Again, type of light to use, amber to orange light is great. I met someone last week who said that they have a neighbor who leaves their porch light on all night long, and it shines into their bedroom, and that she and her husband have trouble sleeping as a result. Well, consider that. What is the effect on your neighbors, right? Whatever we do with our land always affects those who are around us. And if you consider your neighbors as not just being human, you can also consider how it affects wildlife. And then, of course, let's get back to the birds. How about starting a movement for Sioux City to join the Lights Out movement? I know that there are those who have been talking about in our community getting Sioux City officially designated as a bird-friendly city. This could be one of the ways to actually do that. Plus, the Lights Out program actually works with businesses, and it really focuses on businesses. How many lights do businesses need to have on at night for security purposes, and it's usually not nearly as many as they have on, they can save a significant amount of money for lighting over the course of a year by turning many of those lights off. It's better for birds, it's better for bats, it's better for all the wildlife. And then, of course, they can advertise their businesses as being bird friendly. And I don't know about you, I'd be more inclined to patronize those businesses. So it's kind of a win-win-win situation there. For us, yeah, if you can make sure that your bedroom is dark, make sure your bedroom is dark. And when you walk into your bedroom at night and you turn on the lights, hopefully they're not the white light, they're more yellow to orange, red if you can be. Because if we actually do this, what we'll find is that the night sky is actually very, very beautiful wherever you are, whether you live in the city, whether you live in the country. The stars are meant to be there. We actually evolved with the dark, just like all the wildlife did. These are scenes from over South Dakota, by the way. And I'll go ahead and stop there. But thank you very much for coming out today. Thank you again to our two co-sponsors of the event, and I believe we have a few minutes for questions.
Geese seem to be a contradiction here. Geese fly in the daytime.
Geese, yeah, but they're large enough that, hawks are not really going to take them. So
They don't need the stars and the moon apparently to navigate.
No, they'll navigate either according to the sun. Some geese actually have a little bit of magnetite in and around their brains that can orient to the Earth's magnetic field. They can also orient themselves in the morning and in the evening. When the sun is shining at dawn or at dusk, it's actually polarized through our atmosphere. They're able to actually orient themselves according to the polarization of the light. We can't see it, but they can.
Any evidence the animals are adapting to this? They're learning to adjust.
None that I have found so far.
Okay.
As one of I think the Delaware researcher pointed out, they've only had about 100 years of this, so they haven't had many generations yet to be able to adapt to it.
Why are they coming up the Midwest? Why wouldn't they go the Mississippi River on up? There's no river going straight up here.
They actually, if I show later on in May, so that flyway that goes up through eastern Nebraska and eastern South Dakota, it actually shifts over toward Iowa and then over toward Illinois and Wisconsin as May continues. So they actually, a lot more of them will orient themselves and come up the Mississippi flyway.
Okay.
Yep. Either.
So, what about mercury vapor lighting or halogen lighting?
The type of light doesn't necessarily matter too much as long as you look at the color of light and where the light is directed. The intensity might actually matter in, like if your house borders fields or woodland or something like that, then the light will project out further if it's greater intensity. But if you're looking at the yellow to orange lights, you have hoods, the light's directed down so you can see what you need to see at night, and you're not trying to light up, the entire neighborhood or the entire forest or something like that, then that seems to be more beneficial.
So I know in San Jose, they have the big observatory up, and they had to change all their street lights so that they would go down because they were getting to the point where they couldn't, the observatory was being affected. Needless to say, that didn't go over really well with them. So that's why they changed. I think
I agree with you though. The nice thing is that if we make this change, there's not as much light pollution, and astronomers, both professional and amateur, are gonna have a much better time at night. So there are good benefits. Rex, I saw your hand up, and then.
Yeah, I've heard of cities cycling the street lights on and off as a way to save on electricity, but also to decrease the light pollution. Have you read much about that?
I haven't read much about that, but if, you know, the city believes that they don't need as many streetlights in certain areas, that those areas will still be safe enough at night for people either in their houses or walking, that sort of thing, it's actually a good idea, because it obviously, you know, really decreases light pollution in any neighborhood, and therefore is not only better for people, but better for wildlife.
I moved to Sioux City in 1990, and then for about an 8-year period, I lived out in Lawton.
Okay.
And I was astonished at how 8 miles made such a difference in what I could see outside at night in terms of the night sky. And I guess I hadn't been that conscious of light pollution in Sioux City, but for no bigger than we are, it seems like it's pretty significant. What do you perceive as the most common sources of light pollution right here in our own town?
In our own town?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it is going to be businesses,
Mm-hmm.
and then probably streetlights. Those are two of the big sources. The other thing that we can do in our own homes, of course, is we can make sure, like, you know, shades are drawn, that sort of thing, so that not as much light leaks out from our windows, and we can make sure that our lights at night are a little more yellow to amber. But it's like my wife and I like to go for walks. We often go for walks somewhere around dusk. And I'd have to say a lot of light pollution might be from these giant TVs that people have in their living rooms. And of course the TVs aren't necessarily going to, you know, have a nighttime mode. So they're going to be emitting a lot of blue light. But they might not be as bright as, you know, regular lamps.
Just a comment I've noticed in my neighborhood, people are putting these motion-activated lights on their houses, which can be a good idea, but they seem to be activated by minimal,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
and
Rabbits.
they're extremely bright.
Yeah, exactly. They are very bright. It's one of these things where, you know, there's a difference between safety and doing good sometimes. I've seen those too. They were installed on a part of my house when I bought the house, and you know, the problem with that is that they were constantly going off. And I'm like, there's nothing out there, you know. They were being activated by little rabbits in the yard. And it's like, they don't need to be activated by rabbits in the yard. So either buy lights where you can adjust what activity level there has to be in order to activate them, or maybe reassess whether or not you really need those types of lights in the neighborhood.
So I remember the comment was it something about the fact that the birds are hitting these windows at night because they're seeing the light from inside the house?
Sometimes because they're seeing the light from the inside of the house, but sometimes because the light from inside the house, like especially if the shade is drawn or partially drawn, will then allow some reflectivity on that, and so they're actually perceiving vegetation there, and so they fly into what they think is going to be the vegetation. Instead, they hit the glass pane.
But if the window is dark, they're not hitting the windows, even though they're flying most of the time at night.
They seem to not hit the windows nearly as much if there aren't lights lighting up that window. Other questions? Again, thank you very much for coming out.
Thank you.